What is rehab or rehabilitation? My name is Fred Vigueras, a board-certified sports and spine medicine physician in Virginia Beach, Virginia. After 10 years of practice, I still find musculoskeletal medicine both fascinating and challenging. This podcast is about the lingering thoughts and questions I've had after residency and fellowship. My hope is to spark discussion, challenge dogma, and share my experiences in musculoskeletal medicine. Welcome to the Talking Rehab podcast. I am going to talk about my experience working as a contractor in the military. Now, I never served, but I was fortunate enough to have a position as a contractor in the Navy. And overall, as a sports medicine physician, it was an amazing experience. I started working for the Navy as a contractor in 2018. And at that particular point in time, I was practicing insurance-based medicine for approximately 6 years. My first job out of fellowship was at a multi-specialty surgical group. And then when I moved to Virginia, I had a position at an academic institution as part of the residency program. Overall, it was a great experience. And the main thing that I noticed right off the bat was there's no insurance, so no prior authorization. So a lot of the hassle and the frustration of working on a day-to-day basis was significantly better. I didn't have to deal with much paperwork. I simply just saw patients on a daily basis. Another thing that was unique was I was able to practice as I saw fit. So there's a fair amount of autonomy that I had working in this system. At least my interpretation of what was needed was as long as I could take care of the active duty Navy and made sure that people received good care, they pretty much just left me alone to do as I saw fit. The population overall was also ideal. If you're a sports medicine physician or you work with musculoskeletal injuries, the population essentially are all very young and healthy. So I'm talking, the youngest patient I had was 18 years old. Probably the oldest that I had was maybe late 40s. So I took care of the active duty military in addition to their families. So spouses, sometimes the children, things like that. From a anatomy standpoint, it's also great. In the earlier part of my career, I had a predominantly spine-based clinic. So I would say I was about 75% spine and 25% musculoskeletal. So I was using ultrasound, but it was fairly sporadic, which as you're trying to hone a skill, it can be challenging if you are only seeing musculoskeletal pathology, once every couple of days or even every couple of weeks. A lot of great anatomy, a lot of great pathology as well. And it was really a time where my ultrasound skill and knowledge improved. I attribute a lot of this to the way that the clinics were set up. They were set up as it's called a SMART clinic, which is an acronym for Sports Medicine and Reconditioning Clinic. On the whole, these are multidisciplinary clinics. I'm not sure if all SMART clinics are set up this way, but in mine, there was a physical therapist, an athletic trainer, a chiropractor, and also a podiatrist. So we're all in the same building, sharing the same workspace. It was a pretty cool setup because I would see people and then refer them off for therapy or to work with an athletic trainer, and I would see them out in the same space that I just treated them in. So I could actually watch them rehab at the same time. So that was actually really, really cool. I really enjoyed that. The work schedule was also different. I worked Monday through Thursday, but my first patient was at 5 in the morning. I worked 4 10-hour shifts from 5 a.m. to 1500 or 3 p.m. Most of my patients were kind of a good mix of new patient and follow-ups. Each of the slots were 30-minute slots, and I had a lot of autonomy again to create the schedule as I saw fit. So It was definitely a great experience from that standpoint as well. It was a great mixture of clinical and procedures. So procedure wise, the only machine that I had was an ultrasound. So majority of my procedures were ultrasound guided steroid injections, hydrodissections, peripheral nerve blocks. But I also was doing a lot of regenerative medicine, or predominantly PRP. In my previous experiences up until that point, regenerative medicine was something that I did every now and then, but it's actually quite interesting in the military. PRP in particular, platelet-rich plasma, is actually quite common. So I was very, very excited to start doing more regenerative medicine. And then when I would talk with my patients, a lot of them are like, "Oh yeah, I've done that before. It doesn't work." So it was a little bit anticlimactic because I guess like the civilian world, regenerative medicine is not really an affordable option for probably the average household. But in the military, it's paid for, I guess, by the taxpayers. It's quite common. PRP is essentially an option for every patient. So it was great because I got to play around with it and try it in different areas that I ordinarily wouldn't have been able to in the civilian world. The way my contract was set up, I was initially hired by a contracting agency, and I was set up as an employee. So in addition to the hourly rate, I did have benefits as well. Essentially the way that the sports medicine position was set up is it's kind of like an evergreen contract, and essentially these companies will bid on the contract every couple of years. So at the end of my first year, contract was won by a different company, and I guess they could have potentially got rehired all new people, but I think the general trend is that they just kind of kept the same staff, and they didn't really kind of go through the process of rehiring because credentialing took almost 9 months. So that was quite a big stretch of time from beginning to end before I actually started working. Obviously when you're working as a contractor, you do have a lot of security and background checks to go through. But so they had a tendency to kind of just hire the same people. But the second company I worked for actually dealt with me as a 1099. So from a financial standpoint, there's no insurance. They paid you a higher rate. The higher rate was nice, but again, I did not have some of the benefits that I was accustomed to, particularly a retirement investment account. So it did give me an opportunity to open up my own LLC. And so I was created a company and employed by that company, and I was paid as a 1099. So that had its pluses and minuses in terms of, being a contractor as a W-2 or a contractor as a 1099. A couple of the other physiatrists in my department were able to get government positions, so those were a lot more stable. But for whatever reason, it was just a lot harder, or those positions never really came up consistently. So there was always a sense that the sports medicine contractors were just kind of waiting for these GS positions to open up, but they just never really did. So at least from my standpoint, a large majority of the people I met were contractors. With respect to the goals of treatment in the civilian world, a lot of times it's to get people's pain better controlled, and that's the primary focus. Work was second. And I think that's probably the major difference that I noticed was with the active duty military, the primary goal was the mission, and more importantly was to make sure that people would be operational and be ready to deploy worldwide at any point in time. Pain was obviously the main symptom that people would come in with, but overall the attitude and the focus was really on trying to get them back as functional and deployable as possible. So I did see a lot of very acute injuries, strains, tendinopathies, stress fractures, some acute fractures. I also started seeing. I think I might have been one of the first people in this position that had a lot of spine experience. So as you can imagine, spine injuries in the military is quite common. So I was able to offer that service line of patients seeing lumbar disc herniations, vertebral body fractures, things like that. There were some folks who had persistent pain. Those again could sometimes be challenging. Some of these patients were severely injured, combat injuries, and they had and referred to me from orthopedic surgery to help manage. And again, this was kind of another side of medicine that I never really had to deal with as a civilian, because for some of these folks, they were just not going to be deployable due to the severity or the extent of their injuries. So I had to try and help them as best as I could with the resources that were available. And at least at my particular institution, we had all the specialties in terms of neurosurgery, orthopedic surgery, interventional pain. We had psychologists. We had physical therapy, pelvic floor therapists. We had an aquatic program, and from that standpoint, it was really great because any physiatrist is really looking for a multidisciplinary playground. And, to be honest, that's kind of what this experience was. With these complicated patients, there was still a resource issue. Specialty clinics were often quite busy. It was really very hard to get people in a timely manner. And that was obviously very frustrating. I think I came across this story several times where the active duty person will have an injury that they had noted several years ago, and finally they found someone that would actually listen to their story and put pieces together, try to get them into the right department. And the clinics were so booked that it'd be like 3 to 6 months out, and by that point in time, these active duty folks, they really want to get back out there. So rather than pursue waiting for the specialist care, they just kind of said, you know what, forget it. I'm just going to just clear me. I want to be deployed again. So it was definitely an interesting pro and con from the multi-specialty clinic standpoint. That being said, it was definitely a multi-discipline opportunity, but there still was not a lot of collaboration amongst the different departments. Even within my own clinic, we would discuss patient care amongst ourselves, but the orthopedic department, the neurosurgery department, the spine department, we were all still kind of in our own silos. Fortunately, at least with the military culture, it was still very much a team-based approach. So I always felt like I could call someone and discuss someone's care. But again, it was still really, very, really challenging to try and organize things. I was still seeing about 18 patients per day, so that's still a lot to juggle. These fortunately were less complicated because again, this is a very young and healthy population. But again, these were kind of unique circumstances, unique injuries, because I wasn't really just thinking about how to treat the injury. I was also having to think about how I can make this person deployable and, more importantly, safe for their squadron. Some of these folks had some pretty big responsibilities, and they felt the weight and the responsibility of the people that depended on them. So, that was also very apparent to me as well. The other thing that was kind of interesting is that I would come up with a really good plan, and people would, just deploy. So I would almost never see them again. So that was a little bit frustrating as well, because here I am in a system where I have all the resources to make a great diagnosis, come up with a great treatment plan, and then they would just disappear. And I'm talking, I could see them today, and then they get orders, and then they're gone tomorrow. You cannot contact them. You can't email them. They're completely, essentially kind of gone. And it was also kind of difficult, even if I ended up figuring out or finding out where they were going to, it was still kind of challenging to help relay the message. Even though our EMR was, you could see it was universal throughout the military system. You could see everybody's notes. From my standpoint, I always like to have that extra step of really trying to hand over the care to someone else. And that was really quite challenging. The universal EMR was great I guess, from my standpoint, because I could really see the entire clinical history up until that point. In the civilian world, that, as many of you know, it can be quite challenging. It's getting records was not as much of a problem in the military. Now, I still live in a military town, so I am now a civilian again, and it's hard to get records from the military. So it's kind of the same problem on the other side. In terms of reasons why I left, it definitely wasn't because of the job, because as I said, as a sports medicine physician, it's kind of a dream job. The military is like the world's largest athletic team, and it was not really the patients or the way the job was set up. In my particular case, scheduling wasn't that great. I did have fairly young children at the time, and I was actually home a lot more. I only worked 4 days a week. I was off on Friday, so I had a 3-day weekend, and I'd be home at 3:00. So I would always see them come home, but I didn't really look at it from my kids' standpoint, because from their standpoint, I would say goodnight to them, and then I would leave my house at like 4:20 in the morning, so I wouldn't see them for breakfast. So from their standpoint, it was, even though I technically was home more, it didn't really seem that way to them, because I never saw them in the morning. I would basically say goodnight to them and then see them after school. So that for me was a really big reason as to why I decided, I need to maybe move on from this particular position. The second two reasons is that aside from seeing the traditional sports medicine type pathology, I was not able to do interventional spine or EMG anymore. Again, my position was really created for me to be in one position and fill a particular role. And while the interventional pain department and the neurology department were happy for me to do these other procedures, because there was certainly a huge backlog for pretty much everything, logistically, it was just very hard for me to do my primary job and then try and add on these other procedures. And when you do, I guess, any technical skill, you don't want to step away from it too long. At one point, I hadn't done an interventional spine injection for almost 2 years. So I wanted to get back to that, not just because I liked seeing and doing those cases, but I also didn't know where my career was going to go. And I always wanted to have that skill set in my back pocket. And I didn't want to be so comfortable and just forget how to do it. And then something happens with this particular job, and I have to find a new job. And then I know I am now down 1 or 2 skills. EMG was kind of the same way. I was able to do a lot of EMGs still within the position, but again, at times I just kind of felt like I was really kind of really spread kind of thin when it came down to my Monday through Thursday job. But on the whole, it was an amazing experience. I think if you have the opportunity as a sports medicine physician or even as a physiatrist, the military population is definitely underserved. They do need our help. They need great physicians, great clinicians. So if you do have the opportunity, I highly recommend it. I have zero regrets. I'd love to be able to help out this community in the future. I'm still trying to figure out, is there a way that I can still help in my current role, even though I'm not a contractor anymore. Hopefully this was helpful to you guys, and thanks for listening. Thank you for listening to the Talking Rehab podcast. I hope that this podcast stimulates you to question your own practice and how you approach rehabilitation. I truly appreciate your time and attention. If you enjoyed listening, make sure to like and subscribe to the podcast. I wish you a movement-filled day. Take care.